What it shows me is that you are as enthusiastic as we have been at the Conservation Commission over the last months. David has been bringing one map after another. In the town plan, it says, talks about the Conservation Commission working on figuring out some kind of an overlay of the town, of what parts of the town are important to conserve, what parts of the, how we look at this town into the future. And we've been studying and studying and studying these maps, and every time he comes with a different map that shows something a little bit different. And so we're really excited. We want your input. It's a really great thing to have a person in our town that's on a Conservation Commission that has all this knowledge about maps. So expect to learn a great deal. And next month we have a program, Kim Royer from the state is coming to talk about all the wildlife corridors that we have in town. What are the pieces of forest that we need to keep connected and and make sure that the wildlife can live here comfortably. I'm glad you're here, and Judy Fink, Conservation Commissioner, is going to start and then turn it over to David.
This is just so phenomenal to have such a great crowd here tonight. People who are interested in maps, people who maybe don't know how to read maps and want to learn more, people who are real pros at reading maps. What happened out here before you came into this room is exactly what we're going to be doing later, and it's exactly what happened to us as a commission when we were looking at these maps. So Jeff Nugent and David Greenewalt, and then David continued with it. Just about every Conservation Commission meeting that we had in the past year, we reserved a little bit of time towards the end of the meeting to take a look at these maps. And we were like kids in a candy store. It was just remarkable how exciting it was to take a look at these things and start to develop a common understanding of what our town is all about. We were looking at maps that had geologic features, we were looking at water features, we were looking at contour lines, we were looking at old roads, we were looking at paved roads, and it's all just really, really fascinating. And what we wanted to do is share these experiences with you in our town as well, and it'll help all of us to have a common understanding of what we're all about in Dummerston, and also help us to make decisions as a Conservation Commission and as a community in terms of how we go forward in protecting these beautiful natural resources that we have in town. So just a couple of reactions of things that I noticed as we were taking a look at these maps. So David would spread these maps out on the table, and initially this is the first thing that would happen, and I bet this already happened to some of you tonight. If not, it will happen to you, is, oh, that's where my house is. And full disclosure, I am not real savvy with reading maps. I have a husband who I call Map Man, thank God. But I was convinced that I lived in the northwest corner of Dummerston. And we're looking at these maps, and all of a sudden I realized, oh no, I live in the southwest corner of Dummerston. And it was just such a, I could feel my brain making this big shift. So we discovered together how it really gives us this sense of where we are, in space. The other thing that started happening to us, and this hopefully will happen to you tonight when we go back out and look at maps, is that we started recognizing places that were very significant to each of us. Somebody said, oh, this is a place where I've seen a lot of bear sign. Somebody else said, really beautiful stand of trees here. Somebody else was talking about the cellar holes. It was really, Bill Johnson pointed out to us, this is an amazing view of Mount Monadnock from over here. So we all had these really, the special interest of things that make this community significant to us. And then we also were learning some map skills. And I think all of us can benefit from brushing up on those skills, and I think it's really helpful. So as Mary Ellen mentioned, from that experience of looking at maps month after month after month, we started thinking about how can we develop a series of programs for the community to learn more about our town. And so September, I think quite a few of you were here when Marjorie Gale the state geologist came and did a presentation, and she had these really, really interesting geologic maps and talked about, you know, how Vermont developed geologically over millions of years. And we started to understand bedrock and some of the geologic materials that are the foundation. Last month, we co-sponsored a workshop with the Historical Society. Mike Cloth came, and he did this amazing program on the history of mammals and other animals in Dummerston through historical times and through climate change issues, and also just changes in forests being cleared and herding and farming, and how that changed the animal corridors. Next month, I think, did you already mention that next month? Yeah. And so we'll be talking about wildlife corridors in Dummerston, and we'll be using maps as a source of information for that as well. Just a quick thought about when I was thinking about how we were going to talk about maps, and I thought about when I used to teach third grade in New Hampshire, and the curriculum in New Hampshire, and I think it probably is state by state, third grade kids learn about the town. And so when I was thinking about how to help the children understand where they are in space, I thought, well, let's have them start making maps. So we started with having them draw a map of their rooms, and then a map of their house, and then a map from their house to the school. And we spread all these maps out on the floor and looked at them and realized everyone's map is different. We don't have a common language. We don't have a common context. And from that, the kids started to realize, well, that's the reason to have a map. A map helps you to understand where you are within a specific area, and also helps sort of to broaden your outlook as to when you're moving into larger and larger spaces. So, I thought about that in terms of what we were doing in the Conservation Commission. Is it was helping us understand our place in the universe, so to speak. So what David's going to do is David's going to help us have that common language about maps. And he, is, as you know, a really wonderful map maker. And I'd say most, if not all, of the maps that are out there are maps that David has made. And he's going to just do a basic, general explanation of how to read a map, directionality, elevation, contour lines, features, scales, and keys. Probably most of you already know how to do this, so it'll be a great refresher for most of you. And then what we're going to do is take a little break, get some cider and some cookies. Hopefully we'll have enough cookies. This is really, it's a great problem to have. And then what we're going to do after that is just take a look at the maps that David has spread out on the table. And there's maps along the counter there, and then there are some maps on a smaller table over here. There are also some Post-it notes and some pencils. And just gather around, wander around, take a look at the maps. If you have any questions about what you're seeing, write down your questions. If you have any comments or anything that you want to share with everybody else about, some special places that you have, write those down as well, and just stick those Post-it notes right on the maps. Dave is going to be joining the conversations, and those of you who, I know Roger is quite an avid map explainer. So Roger, if you wouldn't mind helping out people as well. And that'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions and share your comments verbally as well as writing things down. And this is the first of hopefully many more of these kinds of activities that we'd like to do with you. So please make sure you let us know what you think about it. Okay? Thanks. David, it's all yours.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. My name is David Greenewalt. I'm a member of the Dummerston Conservation Commission, and I live just up the road here, 5 minutes. I've been a cartographer for over 30 years, first at the Wyndham Regional Commission, then a founding member of Cartographic Technologies, where my focus has been making tax maps in Vermont. I've been working with the town of Dummerston's maps for over 10 years.
A little louder, please.
This evening will be in two parts, as you've heard. First, I'll go through some slides, basic mapping concepts, and then we'll go to the other room and look at some maps, old and new. Most of you have seen them already, I think. In the interest of time, I'd like you to please hold your questions until after this, and I'll just try to burn through these slides quickly if I can get this to work. Yeah, a little bit. Very basic parts of reading maps. There are going to be three elements that every map will have. A theme, an author, and an audience. And while it seems very basic and rudimentary, it's very important, and it's a great way to approach any map. What is the purpose of the map? What is its message? Who made the map? And who's the intended audience? So in this case, the theme would be road travel, the author is AAA, and the audience is drivers. Other basic elements of maps are listed here. I'll go through them quickly. The first feature of a map that is not required, but suggested, recommended is a title. It's going to be the in this case, the who, where, and when of a map. It's going to be the overview of what you're looking at. It's going to be in large font. It's going to be easy to see, if not the first thing you see. It's the first thing you should look for. The map itself will be some real-world simplification. It's going to be representation of data in space. This map has a locator map. It's showing where the map area is in the larger surroundings. They're often a small map, an inset map. This one doesn't have it. An enlargement of certain areas where detail is needed. The legend, or the key, will have the details of the map contents. It can be thought of as a refinement of the title. Here, sort of the translation of the map features that you're going to see and how to understand the symbols that are used on the map, the points, the colors. The scale, how much reduction has been applied to the map. The scale is going to be a ratio of distance on the map to the distance on the Earth. In this case, 1 unit on the map is 70,000 units on the Earth. And sometimes you'll see 1 inch equals 100 feet. And just to note that those units are not the same. And you wouldn't want to fall into the trap where you are not paying attention to the units. This is, there are no units to this. So this applies to 1 foot is 70,000 feet. And as long as those units are the same, that scale holds true. Just don't fall into that trap, ignoring the units. Scales can be graphic or numeric, and this one also has a graphic scale showing the length of certain distances on the map. One thing to note about that is if this map was enlarged or reduced, that graphic scale will hold true. The graphic scale will shrink as much as you shrink the main map, and it's still accurate. The numeric scale will not. 1 inch will no longer equal 100 feet, or whatever the unit is. Maps will generally have a north arrow. This one does. North, the convention is that north is always up. It's such a common convention that many maps don't have a north arrow. If they don't have a north arrow, you know it's up. It's the top of the page. Some north arrows can be fairly complicated looking. This is showing several different norths. The star is pointing to the true north, and the MN is pointing to magnetic north off to the west there. And this map off to the side is showing true north here, and this is the path that magnetic north has taken over the past about 400 years. It is not stationary, magnetic north, and so it causes all sorts of confusions. But when you're using a compass, that's what it's pointing to. It's not pointing to the North Pole. Other fine print on a map will be things like the author, who made the map, and there'll be sources, where the data came from. There'll also often be a date, and the date can be associated with the sources. The multiple dates can be applied to multiple sources, and it's important to know how old and how current the map is and the map data is. Basic map reading. I'd like to talk a little bit about 2D and 3D, 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, and that how to represent topography or terrain, the undulating land surface of Dummerston on a 2-dimensional map. So how can we show that? And a common method used to represent terrain is with contour lines. A contour line is a line of equal elevation, and you can show hills, valleys, ridges, everything you need to see. And here is a section of a contour map. Dummerston Center there in the middle. East-west road is running horizontally through the map. And while the information, while very informative, contours are difficult to interpret in order to see that surface of the ground. And I call this trying to interpret a bowl of spaghetti. So contours are lines that represent the intersection of a horizontal plane, and in this case, the hills. So in this case, the contour map is the projection of those lines down onto a single plane. And if that graphic makes sense, then you can see how you can try to take that contour map shown at the bottom, and in your mind project them back up again and see the hills that they're trying to represent. And it's a difficult trick, but it's what the contour map is actually showing, is that elevation. This is a graphic showing the same hill and 4 different contour maps that are generated from it. And it's just showing different contour parameters that will result in different maps. The top 2 there essentially have different contour intervals. And so you end up with something that looks quite different. So while contours can be hard to interpret, they have a lot of information, and there's several graphic methods that can be used to combine with the contours to visualize the landforms. So this first one is sort of an oblique view, and I'm sorry the projection is. So the top is an oblique view with contours. The second image is shading, where the convention is to imagine a light coming from the upper left and shining down on the surface, and you can see where the shadows and light falls. The third one is showing hash marks as another way to give the impression of the third dimension. So back to this map, you can start to see that if you look closely, you can see that the hills start to form as rings, And you can see Prospect Hill up here as a large hill with valleys cut into the sides of it. These valleys tend to have sharp sort of V shapes to them. The ridges of Prospect and most hills are being softer, curved lines. And when you start to stare at it long enough and imagine that graphic earlier, you start to see the hills coming out towards you. Another thing you can see here is on this east side of Prospect Hill, the lines are further apart. They're horizontally spread out, and that's showing a fairly shallow slope. And the contours here are tightly packed together, which is because they're on a steep slope, and so you can get a slope in your mind as well as a height. So the graphic shading that we saw before was a good illustration of technique to imply depth. And if we apply that to the same map, you can imagine this same surface being shaded from, being illuminated from the upper left. And you get to see this 3D image start to emerge. So that's all trying to show this elevation information. I'd like to jump now to a source of elevation information, which is LiDAR. LiDAR data is elevation data. It's pure height, highs and lows. It stands for light detection and ranging, and it's usually collected from an airplane, at least in our case it is. It's pulses of laser light that's sent out of an instrument. It's reflected off of a surface and received by the same instrument. And the time that pulse travels is converted to a distance or a range. And if that information is combined with other sensors in the plane, an elevation can be calculated. This is not necessarily new technology, but it is new to Vermont, and it's improving all the time, and it's now widely available for Vermont. Windham County was flown, I think, in 2015 with a pixel size of 0.7 meters. Turns out to be about 2.3 feet. And so there'll be, in a room this size on the ground, there'll be probably close to 200 readings in this room alone. So there's a lot of data, and it's very accurate. So what does LiDAR look like? Apparently not much. This is raw elevation data. I've put roads and some surface waters on this map to give it something to go on. We're here in the church, in the east-west road, middle road going south, and the elevation is high, is white areas, and the dark areas are low. So you can see that there's this valley running here with the stream running down the middle of it. So if this surface was illuminated from the upper left and a light was shining on it, it would look like this. And a lot of the detail will start to pop out. So this is a computer's rendering of that same elevation data. You can see the fields, the smooth fields. You can see the rough woodlands, the valley. You can even see the stone wall around the cemetery. Can zoom back out. There's the Dummerston Center again, with East-West Road. This is DEM data. This is a digital elevation model. This is the LiDAR data. The light is reflecting off of the bare earth. It's going right to the ground and bouncing back up It's hitting the road, it's hitting the fields, and it's hitting the ground in the woods, in the forest. So it's hitting bare earth. This is a DSM, digital surface model, and this LiDAR laser pulse bounced off the first object it hit. So it hit the top of the tree and bounced back. So it took the elevation of the trees and the buildings, and it didn't go through them right to the ground, as the previous image showed. And so it's a different view of the earth. And so here we are again. Now you can see the church standing out, and even tombstones, headstones, and bushes in people's backyards start to show up. Briefly, this is more of the same. This is Prospect Hill, and this is a digital surface model. And you can see the clearing and the tree that's up there by the bench. And we're again back here in the church. And you see a lot of trees, and you don't see much else. But the ability of LiDAR to see through that tree canopy is remarkable, and it gives us a new view of sort of a clear-cut view of Dummerston. And we can see the valleys running through the hummocks and hills. And you can also see, I don't know if you can see these lines coming through there. And those are stone walls that are showing up that in the previous image were not visible. And so even in aerial photographs where the leaves are off the trees, you usually can't see these. And they are standing out very nicely. This is the wall up along the path up to the Prospect Hill, which is up here. So that's what that wall looks like with LiDAR data. So let's see, do this. So this one more time. This is the Dummerston Center. This is the illuminated LiDAR data, illuminated elevation data, and we can combine with that an aerial photograph. This is an ortho photograph taken about the same year. This was in the spring. You can see the fields are starting to green up. The leaves are still not on the deciduous trees. The pine trees are green in the woods. And if I can get this to work. So we can take that same image and run it through the computer and use that, that elevation data to get a fairly remarkable visualization of Dummerston.
Wow.
And so this is running up north along Bunker Road, up that steep, nasty hill, and up to the Bunker Farm. And what's, I think, remarkable about this is that that's two data sets. That's elevation and an aerial image, and combined. And of course, I put the roads on there as well, and for reference. But it's for such a simple set of information. It's I think a striking view. Lastly, this is the same image. It's the same flight, but the yellow lines are the contours. And just to harken back to that scene, this is the contours draped on there, so you can see how they relate to the terrain. And I chose to go up that road towards my house, but it can be done anywhere in the town, and you can get this view anywhere in the town, anywhere in the county, actually, and get the same view with this data, because it's out there. So that's all I have for here. Yes, I'll run this again. If you have any questions, you can ask them now or ask them in there with those while looking at those maps. Yes?
David, you said this information is available out there. Is this the A&R website?
This is at VCGI.
Okay.
Yeah, at the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. And they have a data warehouse, and they have all sorts of data layers. And these are some of them. Yes?
Is there a technology that you could give us a tour of Dummerston in 1875 with this, or would this only be from, you can only use this in a contemporary setting?
Yeah, that's a good question. The terrain hasn't changed that much. The rest of it.
I have an answer for that.
What has?
I do a lot of stuff with Google Earth.
Yeah.
And you can drape historic maps that are georeferenced onto 3D. I do this a lot of the area that I grew up in New York and get these amazing historical run-throughs. I'd love to, if I can get this data into Google Earth as KML layers, I can do this.
Yeah, so there I know there's archives of old aerial photography, so you could go back as far as that goes and drape that on, and you would get a pretty good representation. I don't know how far back you want to go, but 1920s, something like that, 1930s, I think you could.
But you can even do it with those, you know, the
Yes.
way ancient ones, as long
Yes.
as they're georeferenced, you can drape them over any modern 3D
Yeah.
terrain
Yes.
and make it look astonishingly like a tour of, you know, the 1800s.
Expose the errors.
Anything over that, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about scaling when you're designing a map? What comes first, the area that you're going to map, or do you start with the scaling, or do they both come together when you put it on the paper or the software?
Yes, there are all those considerations are in play. If the map is going to be an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and that's a big determining factor. If it's going to be a large map, how big can you print it? It's a question that comes up. But usually the study area is the first thing that you're going to come across. Yeah.
David, the on maps with shading, the shading, we're in the northern hemisphere and the shading is on the southeast side of the hills. And I recall from a class in cartography that somebody 400 years ago or whatever in the northern hemisphere made a decision to put the shading on a certain side of a hill. And so I notice, and I'm sure anybody would notice, if you flip the map around, suddenly hills become valleys and
Yes.
vice versa.
It's a fun trick.
Yeah. Do you know any more of the information?
I don't know. I know it's a convention, and I don't know if Jeff knows that either. I thought there might have been something psychological too, where we're right-handed and we expect the light to be coming from here, and so that's the way things are lit. It's not particularly accurate when you think of where the sun is, and it causes confusion when the shadows are going one way and the shadows from the terrain are going the other way.
Yeah, right.
So you're right, it can be difficult. And I don't know where I don't know who started that, but it's true. If you take that same image and turn it upside down, that mountain looks like a depression. Yeah. You're just used to it.
So should we head on into the other room, take a look at the maps?
Okay.
Great, thank you. I'm never going to get
It has to do with our perspective on the earth. When you think of us in those valleys, we're about this big. We're just a speck. So we're looking up at these mountains, and we think they're mountains, and they're just hills. When you get up there in the plain and you look down, it's much smoother than this.
Yeah, where it is. Gotta find the right.
Usually the top.
So here's the west.
But it needs to be exaggerated, or it just falls to it.
That side isn't.
I think
Shadows are on the right-hand side.
I think I think it's generally the light coming from the upper left. And
So if it's north up,
apparently this is near infrared light as a laser pulse that goes something like hundreds of thousands of times a second. So it's just bursting out there. But apparently they use green light, and green light will penetrate water.
There, it stays on just above it. Okay, where are you?
We are, let's see, you're over here. We are, we're here. That's
That's the pond right there, yes, isn't it? And then you got a brook here?
yeah, I thought the pond,
This is the house. No, that's the pond. That's the house.
that's the house, yeah. And I haven't made it down to this brook yet.
But it's pretty open.
It's, there are a lot of, this one's a lot of
Different
Watersheds.
areas.
And you can think of that as if a raindrop landed here, it would end up going down this raindrop on this side is going to end up somehow down here.
Yeah. And if you're over here, always wonder, do I drain to the west? Do I drain to the north? Yeah, this looks like
Somewhere. I don't know if people call these names, and if there's local knowledge of that or not.
So what is this road here?
it's kind of like,
That's Miller Road.
This is Miller Road.
Yes, so this is Miller Road. Bunker Road up here. There's Miller from here down.
And so this is East West Road.
Or it's east-west here.